Well, I think the role of the political consultant is to make it possible for candidates and others in politics to communicate. Good ones do that effectively, and bad ones don't. And I've always sort of echo what I think you quoted Sawyer as saying, and that is, I've always thought that ultimately voters get what they want. Ultimately, they're smarter than the candidates that seek their votes. And you had this whole period when it was talked about how consultants were manipulating things at the presidential level all the way back to the 60s when you had McGinnis's book and on and on. Never happened. And television, rather than making it less possible for people to judge candidates, actually I think made it more possible, because ultimately, while they didn't see them in person, whether it was in a debate or the spots or the interviews, voters got a chance to look candidates in the eye in the way that they couldn't have done 40 or 50 years ago, and ultimately made rational decisions. If you think back through presidential cycles and White Houses at the time, no White House spent more trying to reshape or shape the image of the president, really beefed up that side of it, than the Ford administration. Didn't work. You can go through all the presidents and say how they tried to change things. It never worked, because ultimately the people see what's there and make the judgments. So I think that consultants make mistakes. Some of them run bad campaigns. Those who do not try to do what I think the consultant or the manager's job is in terms of the candidate, which is to give the candidate the best ability to portray himself or herself to the public, but instead try to change the candidate or try to manipulate things. I think those are the consultants who are on the one hand misserving their client, and on the other hand tend to fail because the people see through that.
Well, I think political consulting, like every other profession, follows a certain sociological pattern. I mean, the pattern is division and specialization. Barbers used to be surgeons. That was the same basic job, being a barber and being a surgeon.
I know a lot of surgeons that ought to be barbers.
And not too many of us today would go to the barber, to have the leg removed. So now we have two separate specialties. And you know what? We don't just have surgeons. We have brain surgeons and toe surgeons and right eye surgeons and so on. So it becomes increasingly specialized. And the same thing is true with our profession. There were people initially who did political consulting in general, and now we have all kinds of subspecialties within the profession. That's a natural, inevitable, and I think largely neutral development. But I think there is, frankly, the way in which some politicians use us, I think, has contributed to some extent to polarization. And I'll just speak candidly. There was a time when people called me, every 2 years or every 4 years for their campaign. And occasionally they'd have a retreat in between, and they'd want someone to come and tell them what the public's thinking. Now political consultants sit in meetings every day with office holders, with state legislatures, with governors, with people on the Hill, and every day the sort of combat that is our bread and butter is part of the dialogue. Now again, that's not a decision we make. We're not calling and saying, please include us in every meeting, but the reality is people do include us, and that necessarily brings that combative element into almost every interaction. Now again, I don't think that's the fault of the political consultants. I think it's an inevitable outgrowth of the system, the way it's developed.
And the
but
technology.
It is true, and the technology. But it is a real happening in my view.
Yeah, I think I agree with all that. There's a financial dimension that spawns the breed. There's just so much more money in politics, and therefore more opportunities to spend it, in a specialized way. I mean, the barber may be the surgeon, and then there are the leeches, and I won't go there. But the point being that the billions of dollars that are now available weren't available when you were called every 4 years. I mean, a presidential campaign was $30–40 million.
I remember when Nelson Rockefeller left the governorship of New York and Malcolm Wilson ran. The manager of governors from Dewey on was a fellow by the name of Burdell Bixby. And I remember going up to the Roosevelt Hotel, and they'd put limits in, which is one of the reasons Rockefeller decided not to leave, or not to bail out and go to the vice presidency. And I was working for Jim Buckley, and I said, well, Bix, what we want to know what we can do for you. And he just shook his head and he said, you know, I know how to run a $25 million campaign. He said, but I'll be goddamned if I can figure out how to run one for $3.5 million, which was one of them, because when you get a lot of money, it doesn't mean you run a better campaign, but it's sort of like the Army. You send 100 people out to do something and you don't know who succeeded, so you have to promote all of them.
Right.
And that sort of happens in today's world.
That's right. We are a maligned industry, and I don't have to tell you all that who are in it day in and day out. The vast majority of people who get in this business, I mean, I never set out to be a consultant. I wanted to be a high school football coach and teach civics. And I was privileged to get an internship working in the Speaker's office in California, and the rest is history. You know, I fell in love with it.
A Democratic speaker named Jess Unruh,
Jess,
who was the author of one of the great lines in the history of American politics. Anyway.
Something about milk.
Yes, something about the mother of all.
Money
quotes.
is the mother's milk of politics. He also had a great slogan that he said to me. He said, young man, he said, everybody has a price. He said, some of these guys, talking about the legislators, he said, some of them it's money, some of them it's booze, some of them it's women. Every so often you find a guy who takes your money, sleeps with your women, drinks your booze, and still votes against you. And he said, you can't buy those guys, but you sure as hell can run them. The key thing, as I was saying how we're all maligned, you could not run modern day campaigns today. You could not have the luxury of candidates who come from nowhere. You could not have 87 new freshman members of Congress today, in which half of them had never been in office before, being able to run sophisticated enough campaigns. The campaign business today, like everything else, is exceedingly fast. It used to be you had a day to respond to a negative story. Today it's instant. Today you've got to have someone who's thinking. At the end of the day, it's always the candidate first and foremost. You don't have a good candidate, you're not going to win. But secondly, you have to have a great campaign, and in most cases you have to be in the district that you can win. But where we all play a role here is, we're sort of like the jockey. A great horse can run fast, but getting that horse to go around the circle and seeing the potholes and seeing the competition and knowing when to do it is what we're about. And I think the key thing here is that everybody thinks we're multimillionaires. Everybody thinks that some of the media guys may be, but the rest of us struggle to make livings, and it's not an easy life. There's a lot of our colleagues that have died in Holiday Inns, eating too many hamburgers. There's too many marriages come apart. We do it because we love the game and we make a contribution to America. I've never met a person in this business that isn't a good soul, who doesn't care deeply about his candidate, maybe more at the beginning than at the end of a campaign, and vice versa. But American politics would not work today if it wasn't for us. And there aren't, as I said, there aren't the party bosses. A fascinating panel that I participated in at Harvard in 1985 was the 25th anniversary of the Kennedy-Nixon campaign. And they had the people who had done the Nixon and Kennedy campaign. And they were all like the AAs and the friends of the family, and there weren't any real professionals in it. And that's the way it was in 1960. Where today you could not possibly run a presidential campaign. Can you imagine Barack Obama picking his best friend, wherever his best friend may be, and saying, I want you to go out and run this billion-dollar campaign and go out and beat Hillary Clinton, and Hillary's going to have her best friend from Chappaquiddick, and we're going to have an all-out campaign. I mean, I just think, and I defend this industry constantly, not just because I made spent my life in it. I found the vast majority of these people are great people who participate in the game, and we make it better. We don't make it worse, we make it better. And the media people all want to dump all over us, and at the end of the day, they all want to know our inside information. And sometimes we tell them, sometimes we don't. They have a job to do, we have a job to do. But at the end of the day, American politics works better than any other country in the world because of us. And equally as important, when people... And if you think in terms of Egypt and Libya and these countries today, they're not going to have democracy till they get people who can come in here and teach them how to build parties. And that isn't easy. You can't do that in a year. You can't do that in 6 months. Find candidates and train candidates. Communicate to the voters what you're about. Develop constitutions. Each and every one of those things are what we do. And I think to a certain extent we should never, ever feel ashamed of our profession. We should be proud of our profession. We are all Americans, whether Republicans or Democrats. We all love each other. We fight with each other. At the end of the day, we respect each other. And I think it's a tremendous, and any young people who are just thinking about getting in, it's a fabulous, fabulous experience that you'll have, and you'll meet some of the greatest people in the world.
Here, here, Ed.
Thank you.
Before we move into the next phase of this, I wanted to take an opportunity to see if there are any questions from the audience before we shift gears here a little bit just on the things we've talked about. Yes.
Good question.
I think I encouraged volunteers. I sort of grew up in a volunteer, and one of the things that I did with the Reagan campaign, to Paul Laxalt's complaint, was this extraordinary man who was the chairman of all of Reagan's campaigns, is we set out to basically rebuild a volunteer structure in America. By the end of that campaign, we had 600,000 people, each with a task. Which doesn't sound like a big number compared to what Obama and others have done, but it was a gigantic number at that point in time. And we invited people back into the game, and it takes work. It's not easy. It's not like doing a poll which you control or doing a commercial. But once you get those people active, they've bought into the game, many become candidates in the future. And to me, the more of that you can do, the more important it was. And how we built our structure was we spent a lot of money in the primary that we had, because obviously we weren't being challenged, but we did the whole voter registration program. We went out and we registered voters. And we gave people something to do. We had them communicate. We had them drop off mail. We did all the kinds of things that we did way, way back. But my sense today is people want to have some role and some relationship with the candidates. Unfortunately, what I think has happened is they elect these people, they go off to Washington, they see them on television once in a great while. They don't feel that they're basically still connected to the community. To me, keeping that candidate and that who becomes an office holder connected to that community is very, very important. So the volunteer programs are critical. I would say to every candidate today or every incumbent, that Tea Party movement it's not the only voice you listen to, but it's an important voice, and you go out there and you listen to it. And you basically find out what it is that's bothering them. I've done something that a lot of people never did. I always take my fundraiser. I make them a very critical part of my planning structure, because they know what the money people are thinking. And there's too many money people who give money who don't feel that they're heard from. You want all the input you can get. It's as important as polling is. And I always say, people say, you have to do all this polling. I said, it's like flying an airplane without the air traffic, without the controls. You need to know where the body politic is. Not that you always basically talk to those issues, but you need to know what those issues are. And I find that real people today who are willing to go on the street and fight hard, whether it's Wisconsin or a Tea Party movement across the country, they concern deeply about whatever it is that's bothering them, and you need to listen to them.
Well, just to follow up on the question and something you said in your answer about new ways of connecting, those new ways are quite obvious: Facebook, Twitter, all sorts of digital connections. Obama built, I don't know what the list was, 13 or 14 million names actively engaged in his campaign. But he seems to have failed to maintain the connection in the way that maybe it was a myth that Reagan was quite effective in mobilizing through the RNC, I think, public opinion on things that matter to him, and presidents in general have tried to do that. It seems as if, despite these new ways of engaging people, that it isn't as easy to do it when you're governing as it is in a campaign. And you just mentioned how people seem to become disillusioned. Is that a problem that can be fixed?